Can I hide here, please? He's coming. She was 7 years old, soaking wet, and she had just run 6 blocks in the dark to say those 5 words to the most terrifying man in the room. No plan, no hesitation. She dropped straight to her knees in front of him, a massive tattooed Hell's Angel who hadn't spoken to anyone all night, and she looked up at him like he was the only safe thing left in the world. The entire bar went silent, and the man they called Raven moved his chair. If this story hits you, subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this little girl's courage travels. The rain had been coming down hard for the better part of an hour. The kind of cold driving rain that soaks through everything, jackets, shoes, skin. The kind that makes people walk faster, keep their heads down, and mind their own business. Most people on a Tuesday night like that were exactly where they were supposed to be. Home, warm, safe. Lily was none of those things. She was 7 years old and she was running. Her sneakers, one pink one, white mismatched because she had dressed herself in the dark that morning, slapped against the wet pavement. Her thin jacket, the one with the small unicorn patch her mother had sewn onto the left shoulder, clung to her body like a second skin. Her hair was plastered flat against her face. She didn't stop to wipe it away. She didn't have time. She had been running for 6 blocks. She didn't know exactly how many. She couldn't count, not right now, not with her chest burning and her legs screaming and that sound still ringing in her ears. The sound of the door slamming, the sound of his voice. You come back here, right now. You come back here or I swear to God. She ran faster. The street ahead of her was mostly dark. A laundromat with its lights on but nobody inside. A hardware store closed up tight. A pawn shop with iron bars over the windows. And then at the far end of the block, there was light. Not the clean white light of a grocery store or a gas station. Something older, something amber and low, leaking out from under a heavy door and through windows that hadn't been cleaned in a long time. A sign above the door read, "The Iron Lantern." Lily had never been inside a bar in her life. She didn't know what a bar was, not really. Her mother had told her once that bars were places where grown-ups went when they were sad. She didn't think about that now. She thought about the light. She thought about the door. She thought about the fact that it was the only open door on the entire street and that somewhere behind her, she could hear footsteps. She hit the door with both hands and shoved. The Iron Lantern was not the kind of place that got surprised easily. The regulars had seen things, fights that ended badly. Arguments that turned ugly, the occasional stranger who walked in thinking it was a different kind of establishment and walked back out in a hurry. Pete, the bartender, had worked the bar for 11 years. He prided himself on being unshakable. He looked up when the door flew open, and for a half second he genuinely did not understand what he was seeing. A little girl, soaking wet, running. She didn't stop at the door. She didn't look around the way most people did when they entered the Iron Lantern for the first time, that slow, cautious scan of the room, that moment of recalibration, when you realize exactly what kind of place you'd walked into. She ran like she already knew where she was going, even though she had never been here before in her life. She ran straight to the back corner of the room, straight to Jack. Jack Raven Calloway was a large man, not in a way that was easy to describe quickly. It wasn't just height, though he had that. It wasn't just the breadth of his shoulders or the thickness of his forearms or the particular way he occupied a chair as if he had grown into it. It was something else, something in the stillness of him. The way he sat with his back to the wall, his elbows on the table, one hand wrapped loosely around a glass he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. The patches on his vest, the ink that ran from his knuckles up past his wrists and disappeared under his sleeves. The particular quality of his silence, which was not empty silence, but the silence of a man who was always watching, always calculating, and had learned a long time ago that most situations in life resolved themselves if you simply waited long enough. He had been sitting alone since 8 o'clock. It was now 9:15. He had not spoken to anyone except to order his drink. Nobody had approached him. Nobody ever did not on their own. That was, as a rule, the way Jack preferred things. Then the little girl ran across the room and dropped to her knees in front of his table. She looked up at him. Her eyes were huge, dark brown, red-rimmed from crying, or from the wind, or from both, and they were fixed on his face with a kind of desperate focus that Jack had not seen in a very long time. Not since he stopped that thought. Her hands were shaking. She had pressed them flat against the edge of the table to steady them, and he could see that they were small and pale and very cold. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Can I hide here?" she whispered. "Please, he's coming." Jack looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he looked at the door. Then he moved his chair. It was a small gesture, a few inches to the left, but it opened a space, a narrow, dark space between the chair leg and the wall that a 7-year-old could fit into if she pulled her knees up tight and didn't breathe too loud. Lily understood immediately. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything. She crawled under the table, pressed herself into the corner, pulled her knees against her chest, and went completely still. Jack moved his chair back. From across the room, Pete stared. He had stopped pretending to dry glasses. His mouth was open slightly. He looked at Jack. Jack looked back at him, and something in that look, something quiet and flat and absolute, made Pete close his mouth and look away. The iron lantern went back to its usual murmur of low voices and bad music and rain against the windows. Nobody said a word. Under the table, Lily counted her own heartbeats because it was the only thing she could think to do. She counted to 30, then started over. The floor was cold and slightly sticky and smelled like spilled beer and something sharp she didn't have a name for. The chair leg was rough against her shoulder. She could see a small slice of the room from where she was, a narrow stream of boots and bar stools and the bottom half of the front door. She watched the door. Above her, she could hear the man's breathing. Slow, steady, like someone who was sitting at a table having a drink, not doing anything interesting at all. She didn't know why, but that sound, that calm, slow breathing, was the most reassuring thing she had heard in hours. She counted to 30 again. At 27, the door opened. She heard the boots first. Heavy, deliberate, the kind of footfall that doesn't rush because it doesn't have to. She saw them from her hiding place, dark brown work boots, thick-soled with mud, on the left heel that hadn't dried yet. They stopped just inside the door, didn't move for a moment, just stopped. She pressed herself harder into the corner and bit down on the inside of her cheek. Above her, nothing changed. The man at the table didn't shift in his seat, didn't tense, didn't make a single sound that was different from any other sound he'd been making. He just sat there. The boots started moving again, slow, deliberate, moving through the room. She heard a voice she knew, say with a warmth that was not warmth at all. "How's everybody doing tonight, good crowd?" A pause. "Bartender, hey, I'm looking for someone. A little girl about this tall, dark hair, pink jacket. You seen her?" Pete's voice, when it came, was careful. "Can't say I have." "That right." Not a question. "Funny, because I followed her tracks right up to this door." Another pause, longer this time. "She's my daughter. Got turned around in the rain. Happened before she does, that gets confused. Kid's got some problems, you know how it is." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "I'm just trying to get her home safe. Like I said, haven't seen a kid." Silence. The boots moved again. "Coming this way." Jack picked up his glass, set it down, looked at nothing in particular. Travis Cole, he would have given his name to anyone who asked, but nobody had asked, stopped approximately 4 feet from the table. Jack was aware of this without looking up. He had been aware of Travis the moment he walked through the door. He had been aware of him for 30 seconds. Before that, actually something in the pattern of the rain, a shadow that moved wrong against the frosted window glass. He had been waiting. "Hey," Travis said. His voice was friendly. His voice was always friendly. It was the friendliness Jack had already decided that was the most dangerous thing about him. "Nice night to be inside, am I right?" Jack said. "You've been here a while." "A while. Travis shifted his weight. Jack noted the shift. "You didn't happen to see a little girl come through here, 7 years old. Brown hair. She went out in the rain, got herself turned around. Her mom's worried sick." Jack turned his glass slowly on the table. No. Travis was quiet for a moment. Jack looked up at him then for the first time and held eye contact with the kind of absolute empty stillness that certain men spent their entire lives learning how to project. Travis met his eyes. He was good. Jack would give him that. He was very good. His smile didn't flicker. His hands hanging loosely at his sides didn't clench. But his eyes moved, just once, just a fraction. Down and to the left, toward the table. Jack's expression didn't change. Anything else? The smile held. 1 second. 2. No, man. Sorry to bother you. Appreciate it. Travis stepped back. Hope you enjoy your night. I plan to. He listened to the boots walk back toward the door. He listened to the door open. He listened to it close. He did not move. Is he gone? The voice from under the table was so small he almost didn't hear it. Not yet, Jack said quietly. He said it without looking down, without changing his posture, without doing anything that might look to anyone watching through those frosted windows like he was talking to someone under a table. Give it a minute. Silence. Then, he's my dad. I know. Another silence, heavier this time. He hurts me, she said. The way she said it, not as a cry, not even as a complaint, but as a simple, flat statement of fact, the way a child states something they have long since accepted as the unchangeable truth of their world, hit Jack somewhere behind the sternum with the force of a closed fist. He kept his face still. I know, he said again. How do you know? Because kids who are okay do not run into places like this. He paused, and because I've seen a lot of men, I know what kind he is. She was quiet again. He could hear her breathing, which was steadier now than it had been when she first crawled under there. Good, that was good. What's your name? He asked. Lily. Lily. He said it once as if committing it to memory. How old are you? 7.5. The half matters. Despite everything, something shifted in Jack's chest that was almost a smile. It does, he agreed. The half matters. What's your name? Jack. Do you have a nickname? Because everyone here looks like they have a nickname. This time he did almost smile, though he kept it off his face. Some people call me Raven. Like the bird. Like the bird. She seemed to consider this. I like birds, she said. Then Jack, is he watching the window? Jack's eyes moved minimal, practiced to the frosted glass of the front window. The shadow. Still there, still. Yeah, he said. What do we do? Jack reached into his vest pocket and pulled out his phone. It was old, a cracked screen, a case that had been repaired twice with electrical tape. He looked at it for a moment. Then he pulled up a number he had not dialed in almost 2 years. We make a call, he said. Pete appeared at the edge of the table, moving with the careful quiet of a man who had just made a decision he wasn't entirely sure about. He set down a glass of water and beside it a small bowl of pretzels. He didn't say anything. He just set them down and looked at Jack. Jack looked back at him. For the kid, Pete said quietly. Jack nodded once. Pete walked away. A small hand appeared from under the table, reached up, took 2 pretzels, and retreated. Thank you, came a tiny whisper from below. Pete, halfway back to the bar, stopped walking. He stood there for a moment with his back to the room. Then he reached up and rubbed the back of his neck, and when he turned around, his expression was the expression of a man who had just unexpectedly remembered that he was in fact a decent human being. Yeah, he said to nobody in particular. Yeah, okay. The phone rang 4 times. Calloway. The voice on the other end was a woman's, measured, unhurried, with the particular flatness of someone who had learned long ago not to react emotionally to phone calls that came at strange hours. I haven't heard from you and I've got a situation. A pause. Talk. 7-year-old girl came into the Iron Lantern about 15 minutes ago. Running from a man who just followed her in, gave a story about her being his kid who got lost in the rain and watched the room with the eyes of someone who's very used to not being caught. Jack's voice was low, even almost without inflection. He's still outside. Another pause, longer this time. You sure? I'm sure. Does she have injuries? Haven't checked. She's not crying. She's scared, but she's clear. She told me. He stopped, glanced down at the table as if he could see through it. She told me he hurts her. The woman on the other end took one sharp breath. Just one. Then she was back to that measured flatness. Don't let her out of your sight. Don't let that man back in the building. I'll make some calls. How long? 20 minutes, maybe 30. The man outside isn't going to wait 30 minutes. I know. A beat. Can you handle it? Jack looked at the door. Yeah, he said. I can handle it. He could feel Lily watching him from below. Kids were observant in ways adults forgot they read. Tone, posture, silence, the way someone held a phone after they hung up. He imagined she'd heard enough of that call to put most of it together. She was sharp. He could tell that already. "Is someone coming?" she asked. "Yes." "Is she nice?" He considered this honestly. "She's good at her job." "That's not the same as nice." He glanced down this time. She was looking up at him from the shadows under the table, those dark eyes serious and steady and far too old for a 7-year-old face. "No," he agreed, "it's not. But right now, good at her job is more useful than nice." She seemed to accept this with the practicality of someone who had learned early that the world didn't always give you what you wanted, only what you needed. "Okay," she said. And then Jack, "Yeah, don't let him in again." The way she said it, not a question, not a plea, just a quiet, absolute statement of what she needed, settled over him like weight. He set his phone down on the table. He put both hands flat on the surface, one on each side of the glass. He looked at the door. "I won't," he said. Outside, the rain kept coming down. The shadow in the window didn't move, and in the darkest corner of the most dangerous bar in town, a 7-year-old girl sat with her knees pulled to her chest eating pretzels, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she waited without running. The shadow hadn't moved. Jack had been watching it for 11 minutes, he knew, because he had been counting the same way he counted everything when things got tense, the same way he had learned to count in places far less forgiving than this bar. The shadow behind the frosted glass was patient. That was the part that bothered him most. An angry man would have come back through the door, already thrown chairs, made a scene, given Jack something clean and simple to deal with. A patient man was something else entirely. A patient man had a plan. He picked up his phone again and texted one word to the number he had just called, "Faster." The response came back in under a minute, "Working on it." "He's still out there, isn't he?" It wasn't a question. Lily had stopped asking questions she already knew the answers to. She said it the way she said most things, flat, direct, economical, like a kid who had learned that extra words didn't change the facts. "Yes," Jack said. "He's good at waiting." "I noticed." "He does that at home too," she said. He waits. He waits until mom falls asleep and then he..." She stopped. The silence that followed had a shape to it, a specific ugly shape that Jack recognized without needing her to finish the sentence. "You don't have to explain it," he said. "I know." A pause. "I just want someone to know." Jack set his phone face down on the table. He turned his glass once, looked at the door, looked at the window. The shadow was still there, but it had shifted slightly, moved to the right by maybe a foot, repositioning, trying to find a better angle through the glass. "Pete," Jack said without raising his voice. Pete looked up from the far end of the bar. "Close the blinds." Pete looked at the window, looked back at Jack, didn't ask why. He walked to the window, pulled the cord on the old Venetian blinds, and the slat of amber light that had been leaking out to the street disappeared. The shadow outside went still again. Then it moved sharply in the direction of the door. Jack was already standing when it opened. Travis Cole walked back in like he owned the floor. His smile was the same smile it had been 30 minutes ago. Pleasant, unhurried, the smile of a man who had never in his life believed that a rule applied to him. He scanned the room the way he had before, methodical room left to right, bar first, then tables. When his eyes landed on Jack, standing now with his hands resting open at his sides, the smile didn't break. If anything, it widened slightly. "Hey, sorry to bother you again, man. He spread his hands in a gesture of helpless apology. "My kid, you know how it is. Wife's blowing up my phone." "She's not here," Jack said. Right, you said that. It's just..." Travis tilted his head, looking around the room with an exaggerated show of parental worry. "You know, I just figured I'd do one more check, make sure I wasn't missing anything. You understand?" "I understand fine," Jack said. "And the answer's the same." The smile held. "You sure about that?" "I'm very sure." For just a moment, half a second, barely enough to catch if you weren't watching for it, something moved behind Travis Cole's eyes. Something cold and calculating and deeply unpleasant, like a wrong note in an otherwise smooth song. He looked at Jack the way a man looks at an obstacle he's already decided to remove. He was doing the math. Jack could see him doing it. Then the math apparently didn't come out the way Travis wanted because he stepped back. "All right," he said. "All right, no problem. You have a good night." "You too," he left. The bar took a breath. Pete said very quietly from behind the counter, "That guy's coming back." "I know," Jack said. He sat down. Under the table, he could hear Lily breathing faster than before, shallow and tight. "You okay?" he said quietly. "I felt him," she said. "I could feel him standing there. He's gone now. He's going to come back." "Probably, though." "You knew that?" "Yes." Another pause. "Then are you scared of him?" Jack thought about this honestly, the way he tried to think about most things without decoration, without the kind of flattering self-image that got men into trouble. "No," he said. "Why not?" "Because I've met a lot of men like him, and not one of them has ever been as dangerous as he thinks he is." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, what about you? Are you dangerous?" It was the most direct question she had asked him, and he gave it the answer it deserved, which was silence, because there was no version of an honest answer that was appropriate for a 7-year-old hiding under a bar table. But the silence itself must have told her something because she didn't push. "Okay," she said simply. "Good." That almost got him again, that almost smile behind the sternum. He pushed it down. He had a lot of work to do yet. "I'm here." The phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Linda's 12 minutes out. Officer Reyes is closer, 7, maybe 8. Is the subject still on location? Jack typed back. "Circling. He'll make a move soon." The response, "Keep her where she is. Don't engage unless you have to." He almost typed back something sarcastic about that. He didn't. He put the phone away and looked at Pete, who was now polishing the same glass he had been polishing for the last 20 minutes, staring at the door. "Pete." "Yeah." "Anyone else in the back?" Pete glanced toward the hallway that led to the storage room and the single bathroom. "Sal's doing inventory, maybe one other guy." "Send them home." "Jack." "Now, Pete." Pete put down the glass. He went to the back hallway. There was a brief, muffled exchange of voice, in Pete's low and urgent, and two others, confused but compliant. A minute later, two men Jack had never seen before came through the bar, pulling on their jackets, eyes down, moving fast. The back door opened and closed. Pete came back and stood behind the bar. Just him and Jack and the handful of regulars who hadn't moved from their stools. Older men, quiet drinkers, men who had the particular talent of making themselves invisible in situations that didn't concern them. "Do they know?" Lily whispered. "Some of them," Jack said. "Are they going to help?" He looked at the men at the bar. One of them, a heavy-set man named Carl, who had been drinking here since Jack first started coming in 12 years ago, had turned his stool slightly, very casually, so that his back was no longer to the door. Jack noticed that. Carl had been in 2 tours of Vietnam and didn't talk about either one. "In their way," Jack said. "What does that mean?" "It means nobody in this room is going to pretend they didn't see something if it comes to that." She seemed to absorb this. The way she processed things, Jack was noticing, was methodical. She didn't react emotionally in real time, the way most kids did, the way most people did. She gathered information, held, it, turned it over. It was the kind of thing that happened to children who had learned very early that emotional reactions had consequences. "My mom doesn't know where I am," Lily said. "We'll fix that." "She's going to be scared." "I know. She worries about me a lot. She thinks I don't know, but I do." A beat. "She cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. I can hear her through the wall." Jack said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. "He tells her she's crazy," Lily said. "He tells her I make things up. He says I have problems. That's the word he uses, problems, and that she can't trust what I say." Her voice was very steady. Too steady. "He said it in front of me at the doctor's office. He was smiling when he said it. And the doctor looked at me like..." She trailed off. Started again. "Like I was something broken." "You're not broken," Jack said. "I know that," she said. Not defensive, just matter of fact. "I figured that out. It took a while, but I figured it out." This kid, Jack thought. This impossible, unbreakable kid. His phone buzzed again. "Reyes is 5 minutes out." "Back or front?" He typed front. Subject is armed, possible. Approach non-uniform if available. Copy. He slid the phone into his pocket and became very still because the door had just moved. Not opened, moved. The kind of movement that happens when someone on the other side puts a hand against it, tests the weight of it, decides something. Jack's eyes went to the window. The blinds were closed, but at the very bottom edge, where one slat was slightly bent from some long ago incident, there was a thin line of light from outside. And in that thin line of light, he could see the toe of a dark brown work boot. Pete saw it too. He put both hands flat on the bar and looked at Jack. Carl at the end of the bar set down his glass without sound. The room held its breath. The door didn't open. The boot didn't move. 2 minutes of silence that felt like 20. Then the boot shifted, moved away from the door. Footsteps muffled by rain and distance retreating. Pete exhaled slowly through his nose. "He's playing with us," Jack said quietly enough that only Pete could hear him. "He wants us nervous. He wants us to make a mistake." "Is it working?" Pete muttered. "On you a little." Pete made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Jack," Lily's voice from below, tighter than before. "I have to tell you something." "Go ahead." "He has a phone too. I mean, I know that sounds obvious, but he has a phone and he might be calling someone. He does that sometimes. He calls his friend Danny. And Danny is..." She hesitated. "Danny is worse." Jack processed this without visible reaction, though internally several things shifted and recalculated simultaneously. "How much worse?" "Danny has a truck," Lily said, as if that answered the question. And in the particular context of whatever Lily's world looked like, Jack understood that it probably did. He pulled out his phone, typed possible second subject incoming. Request backup. The response took 45 seconds. Longer than he would have liked. Working on it. Reyes is 3 minutes out. Stay put. He typed, "If they come through that door before Reyes, I'm not staying put." No response to that. "Lily," he said. "Yeah. If I tell you to move, you move fast, you move to the back hallway, you find the door that says exit, and you push through it, and you don't stop running until you see a police car. You understand?" "Yes." "Can you do that?" "And yes. No hesitation, no wavering. But I don't want to leave you." The bluntness of it, the simple, unguarded honesty caught him completely off guard. He covered it the way he covered everything. "You won't be leaving me," he said. "You'll be doing exactly what I'm telling you to do. There's a difference." A long pause. "Okay," she said. Then Jack. "What?" "Thank you for not making me go back to him." He didn't answer right away. He looked at the door. He looked at the window. He thought about all the times in his life when he had sat in rooms waiting for things to happen and all the different weights those weights had carried. None of them had felt like this. "That's not something you need to thank me for," he said finally. "That's just called doing the right thing." "A lot of people didn't," she said simply. And he had no answer for that. Because she was right, a lot of people hadn't. The doctor who looked at her like something broken. The teachers who heard what Travis said about her problems and wrote it down in a file. The neighbors who heard things through walls and decided they hadn't. The entire invisible architecture of adults who were supposed to notice and hadn't. A whole system that had failed her, and she had ended up here under a table in a biker bar in the rain at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, trusting a man covered in tattoos who she had known for less than an hour. Jack pressed both palms flat on the table again, grounded himself, focused. The door opened. This time it opened all the way. Travis Cole walked in, and this time the smile was gone. And behind him, filling most of the doorway, was a man Jack had never seen before. Wide, heavy, with the particular blankness of a man who had long since stopped thinking of other people as people. Travis hadn't come alone. He had made the call. Danny had come. Carl set down his glass very slowly. Pete didn't move. Jack stood up. Travis looked at him. Really looked at him, this time without the mask, without the performance of the friendly, concerned father. His eyes were flat and certain, and absolutely convinced that whatever happened in this room next, he was going to get what he came for. "I think," Travis said, his voice stripped of warmth, now cold and direct, "that we've been playing games long enough." "Where is she?" Jack said nothing. Travis took a step forward. So did the man behind him. Jack's hand moved to the back of his chair. And that was when the front window of the iron lantern exploded in a wash of red and blue light, and the voice of Officer Daniel Reyes cut through the room from outside like a blade. "Nobody moves. Keep your hands where I can see them. Right now." Travis froze. The big man behind him froze. And from somewhere under Jack's table, a small voice said very quietly, so quiet only Jack could hear it, You said 3 minutes. Jack looked down. He could see her eyes in the shadows wide and bright and watching. Give or take, he said. And something shifted in Lily's face, then not quite a smile, not quite a cry. Something that sat between the two. Something that looked like a person who had been holding themselves together through sheer force of will, suddenly feeling the first crack of genuine, unguarded relief. She pressed her face into her knees and shook, not from fear this time. From the violent physical release of a breath she had been holding for a very, very long time. Outside, Reyes was still talking. Travis was talking back. The big man was doing the thing that big men with no good options always did, which was nothing because the one thing he'd been brought here to do had stopped being possible the moment the lights hit the window. Pete walked to the end of the bar and picked up the phone, the landline, the old one mounted on the wall, and dialed without being asked. Carl at the end of the bar turned his stool back to its original position, picked up his drink, and said to nobody in particular, "Good." Jack stood between the table and whatever came through the door next, his hands loose at his sides, his eyes on Travis Cole's back, steady and unblinking, waiting with the patience of a man who knew that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do in this world was simply refuse to move. Under the table, Lily breathed. And for now, just for right now, that was enough. The red and blue lights strobed through the gaps in the blinds in a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat, insistent, urgent, alive. Officer Daniel Reyes had his hand on the doorframe and his other hand in a position that left no ambiguity about what came next if either man in the doorway made the wrong decision. Travis Cole had his hands raised slightly, just enough to telegraph compliance without fully surrendering the performance of innocence he was still trying to maintain. Danny, the man who had filled the doorway behind him, had gone very still in the way that very large men go still when they realize that size alone isn't going to settle something. Both of you, step outside right now. Reyes's voice was calm in the way that trained officers' voices are calm, not relaxed, not casual, but controlled, in the way that a hand on a wheel is controlled when the road gets bad. Sir, I'm going to need your ID, both of you. Travis turned very slowly and then looked at Jack one more time before he stepped out the door. It was a long look. The kind that was meant to communicate something specific, something that didn't need words, that this wasn't finished, that stepping outside with a police officer was merely a tactical retreat and not a conclusion, that whatever arithmetic Travis had been doing in his head all evening was still running, still calculating, still patient. Jack looked back at him. Travis went outside. The bar didn't relax. The kind of tension that had been building for the past 45 minutes wasn't the kind that dissolved the moment the immediate threat walked out a door. It was smarter than that. It had soaked into the walls. Pete finally set down the glass he had been holding for the last 3 minutes and put both hands flat on the bar and exhaled through his teeth. Carl at the far end turned his stool back to its original position without a word and lifted his drink. Neither man said anything. There was nothing to say. Some situations were like that. The people inside them communicated in the shared understanding of what had almost happened. Lily, Jack's voice was low even. You can come out now. A pause, then the small form unfolded itself from under the table, slowly, stiffly, the way a person moves when they have been holding a position too long and the body has begun to lock around it. She stood up beside his chair, and for the first time since she had run through that door, Jack got a full look at her. She was smaller than he expected. He didn't know why that surprised him. He'd known she was 7, he'd heard her voice, but there was something about seeing her standing upright that recalibrated things. Thin, pale in a way that wasn't natural. The unicorn patch on her left shoulder was soaked, and the colors had bled slightly into the jacket fabric. Her sneakers left small, wet prints on the floor. She was shivering, though, whether from cold or from the body's delayed response to fear, he couldn't have said. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. She looked at the door. Is he going to be arrested? I don't know yet. Will they believe me? That question, the flatness of it, the way it carried the weight of having been asked before and answered badly, put something sharp in Jack's throat that he dealt with by not speaking for a moment. There's a woman coming, he said. Her name is Linda. She's good at making sure people get believed. Is she a police officer? No, she's something better. She works specifically with kids. He pulled out a chair from the table, not his own chair, the one across from it, and set it in front of her. Sit down, you're shaking. She sat. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked toward the door where the lights were still painting the walls in red and blue. He's going to say I ran away, she said. That's what he does. He makes it sound like I'm the problem. Like I'm difficult. She said the word difficult in a voice that was a near perfect impression of an adult's voice, not Travis's voice specifically, but the particular tone of adult authority used to dismiss a child. She'd heard it enough times to reproduce it without trying. You're 7 years old, Jack said. You ran 6 blocks in the rain to get away from him. That's not difficult. That's survival. She looked at him. Something moved in her face, a brief involuntary reaction she quickly smoothed over. You believe me, she said. Yes. You believed me right away, from the beginning. Yes. Why, he considered this. Because people who are lying about something don't usually run toward the thing they're afraid of. They run away from it. You ran toward it. He paused. That took nerve. She looked at her hands. I was just running, she said quietly. I didn't have a plan. Sometimes that's all it is, Jack said. Sometimes you just run toward the light. Before she could answer, the door opened again and Officer Reyes stepped inside alone. He was younger than Jack had expected from the voice, late 20s, maybe 30, with the particular combination of alertness and exhaustion that defined the faces of cops who work the night shift in towns where not much happened and then suddenly something did. He scanned the room, found the girl beside him, and something in his expression shifted from professional neutral to something more human. She okay, he said to Jack. She's okay, Lily answered without looking up. Reyes blinked, looked at her. Sorry, of course. Are you okay? I said I was. She glanced up at him. Where's my dad? He's outside in my car. A careful pause. He's cooperating. He always cooperates, Lily said. That's one of his things. He cooperates really well with adults until they stop watching. Reyes looked at Jack. Jack said nothing. The look on Reyes's face said he'd caught the meaning just fine without any translation. There's a woman on her way here, Reyes said, crouching slightly so he was more at Lily's level. Her name is Linda Hayes. Do you know what a child advocacy specialist is? No way. It means she's on your side. Her whole job is being on your side. Lily considered this. Does she carry a badge? No. Then how does anyone have to listen to her? Reyes paused, slightly wrong-footed. It was the kind of question a 7-year-old asked that could stop a conversation cold because the answer was more complicated than the question deserved. She carries something better than a badge, he said carefully. She carries documentation. And documentation in the long run is harder to argue with. Lily seemed to weigh this. Then she looked at Jack. Is that true? It can be, Jack said honestly. When the right people are holding it. She nodded once as if filing it away. Then she said with a sudden different quality in her voice, quieter, more careful. Is my mom coming? The room shifted. Reyes straightened slightly. Jack didn't move, but he felt it too. The specific gravity of that question, the weight it carried underneath. He hadn't thought about the mother until now. Not concretely. He had thought child in danger man pursuing her, and his mind had run the necessary calculations and made the necessary moves. But Sarah, the woman who cried through the wall at night so her daughter couldn't hear. The woman Travis had spent what sounded like years convincing that her own instincts were wrong, that her own child was unreliable. Do you know your mom's phone number? Reyes asked. Lily recited it immediately without pause from memory. 10 digits area code included as naturally as her own name. Reyes wrote it down. Does she know where you are? Jack asked. No. Lily's voice had lost some of its steadiness. It was the first crack he had heard in it, small but real. She was going to look for me. She was going to go out looking, and he was going to tell her I ran away because I have problems. The word again, the same flat, borrowed adult weight. She was going to believe him. She always believes him at first. She tries not to, but she does. Not this time, Jack said. She looked at him. You don't know that. No, he admitted. But this time there are other people who know what they saw. That's different from before. People have seen things before, she said, and it didn't matter. He had no argument for that. It was true and they both knew it, and the particular helpless fury of it that a child of 7 had already accumulated enough experience with being disbelieved to make that statement with such quiet certainty settled in the room like something physical. Then Pete from behind the bar said, "She's here." A woman walked through the door with the kind of presence that didn't announce itself loudly, but rearranged a room simply by entering it. Linda Hayes was somewhere in her 40s, compact with close-cropped, gray-streaked hair and the particular quality of stillness that Jack recognized, not his kind of stillness, which was watchful and defensive, but a different kind. Settled, like someone who had walked into 100 rooms like this one and had learned through tian and painful experience exactly what to do in each of them. She looked at Reyes, looked at Jack, looked at Lily. She walked directly to the girl and sat down in the chair closest to her, not across from her, but beside her, close enough to be present without being overwhelming. And she said simply and directly, "Hi, I'm Linda. I'm here because you matter. Not him, not the situation. You, that's the only reason I came." Lily looked at her for a long moment. "Jack called you." "He did." "Do you know him well?" Linda glanced at Jack briefly. "Well enough? Is he a good person?" "One of the better ones I've met," Linda said. "And I've met a lot." Something in Lily's posture, that rigid, held-together quality she'd been carrying for the last hour, shifted very slightly. "Not a lot, not a collapse. Just a degree or two of loosening the way a fist opens when the thing you were bracing for doesn't come." "Okay," Lily said. "What do I have to do?" "Right now, nothing. Right now, you just have to sit here and be exactly who you are. Can you do that?" "That's what I do every day," Lily said. "That's the easy part." Linda looked at her for a moment with an expression that she managed to keep mostly professional, though something moved behind it. "I know," she said softly. "I know it is." Jack moved away from the table, then not far just to give them space, and stood with Reyes near the bar. Reyes was watching Linda and Lily with the expression of a man who was recalibrating something. "The father," Jack said low, "outside, called his attorney approximately 30 seconds after I got him in the car." Reyes's jaw was tight. "He knows what he's doing. He's been through this system before." That landed like cold water. "He has a record, not a conviction. 2 previous calls to that house. Both times no charges." Reyes looked at the table, looked at the girl. "Both times the daughter was interviewed and then the interview was basically dismissed because the father provided a plausible counter-narrative and the mother, he stopped. The mother backed him up. Because he'd convinced her the kid was unstable," Jack said. "That appears to be the pattern." "Yes." Jack turned this over. The system had touched this situation twice and walked away from it twice. Travis Cole wasn't just lucky, he was practiced. He had learned exactly where the seams were in the process and how to slip through them. That meant Linda's documentation wasn't just important. It was the difference between this night meaning something and this night becoming the 3rd time the system looked away. "What do you need from me?" Jack asked. "Written account of what you observed tonight. What he said, how he behaved the second approach bringing the other man." Reyes paused. "And I need you to be willing to testify." Jack said nothing for a moment. Testifying meant court dates, meant lawyers who would dig through every patch on his vest and every year of his history and present it to a jury as evidence that nothing he said should be believed. It meant exactly the kind of visibility that a man who had spent 30 years building a life at the edges of other people's attention did not want. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." Reyes nodded. "No, thank you. The situation didn't call for it." "There's one more thing," he said, and something in his voice shifted. Jack looked at him. "The second call came in 20 minutes ago, from this address." Reyes kept his voice level. The caller identified themselves as the girl's mother. She called to report her daughter missing. He paused. And to report that her husband had just told her that their daughter had been taken by a man at the Iron Lantern who had a known gang affiliation and a prior arrest record. Jack went very still. "Travis made the call," Jack said, "from the parking lot outside, before I made contact." Reyes's eyes were steady. "There's a second unit on the way, Jack, and they're not coming for Travis." The floor didn't drop out from under Jack Calloway because he didn't allow floors to drop out from under him. He processed this the way he processed everything, fast, cold, straight through the facts to the shape of the situation. Travis had been doing math all evening. He calculated that the police would come, had known he couldn't stop it, and so he had flipped the equation entirely. If he couldn't prevent Lily from being found, he could change who the story was about. He could make the story about Jack, an abuser who knew the system didn't fight the system. He redirected it. Linda. Jack's voice crossed the room evenly. Linda looked up. We have a problem. She read something in his face and stood immediately. What kind? The kind where the second unit that's coming thinks I'm the threat. Linda didn't flinch. She turned to Reyes. How long? 8 minutes, maybe less. Then we have 8 minutes to establish what actually happened in this room. She turned back to Lily. Sweetheart, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I need you to tell me everything that happened tonight, starting from when you left your house. Every detail you can remember. I'm going to write it down. She held up a small recorder. And I'm going to record it. Is that okay? Lily looked at the recorder, looked at Linda, looked at Jack. Jack nodded once. Lily turned back to Linda and said with the clear-eyed directness of a child who had decided to trust something and was committing to it completely. He hit me this morning, before school. That's why I was already scared before tonight. That's where it started. And Linda, who had heard many difficult things in her years doing this work, took a slow, careful breath, not because she was surprised, but because it never stopped mattering, and said quietly, Start from there, tell me everything. The recorder clicked on. Pete walked to the front door and positioned himself in front of it in the way that a large man positions himself when he's decided that nobody is coming through that door without going through him first, which was not something he would have said out loud because he was not that kind of man verbally, but which was clear enough in the way he stood that no further statement was required. Carl at this bar pulled out his own phone, old flip phone, the kind almost nobody carried anymore, and dialed. Jack didn't know who he was calling. He suspected it didn't matter. The kind of call you made at 9:45 on a Tuesday night from a bar stool when something like this was happening was the kind of call that said someone here needs a witness, and the person on the other end either showed up or didn't, and Carl had the look of someone who had people who showed up. Jack stood in the center of the room and let Lily's voice fill it small and steady and clear, laying out the facts of her life with the precision of a child who had been rehearsing the truth in her own head for a very long time and was finally saying it out loud to someone with a recorder. Outside, somewhere down the block, the sound of another siren started up, getting closer. Jack didn't move. The siren didn't stop getting louder. Lily kept talking. Her voice didn't waver. She had found a rhythm in the telling of it, the way people sometimes do when they've held something in so long that once the door opens, the words come out with their own momentum, steady and unstoppable. She told Linda about the morning, about the kitchen, about the specific sound of a hand against the side of her head that she had gotten so used to she sometimes heard it even when it wasn't happening, a ghost sound that lived inside the fear. She told it all plainly without drama, without the kind of embellishment that would have made it easier to dismiss. She was 7 years old and she spoke like a witness, like someone who had decided that the truth was the only thing she had left that belonged entirely to her. Linda wrote. Linda recorded. Linda's face stayed professional and open and gave nothing away except twice a brief tightening around the eyes that she immediately smoothed over. She was very good at her job. Jack stood with Reyes near the bar and watched the door. The second unit pulled up outside. He could tell by the way the light patterns changed, the original red and blue joined now by a second set, the combined effect turning the gaps in the blinds into something almost violent in its brightness. 2 doors opened, 2 pairs of boots on wet pavement. That's Hendricks and Morrison, Reyes said quietly. Hendricks is going to come in with the report Travis called in. He's by the book. He'll have to ask you to step outside. I know. Jack, Reyes turned slightly. The report says you used force to prevent a parent from accessing his child. That's the language Travis used. Used force. I moved a chair, Jack said. I know what you did. Hendricks doesn't know that yet. A beat. Let me do the talking first. Don't give him anything to work with. The door opened. Officer Hendricks was older than Reyes, mid-40s, heavier in the shoulders with the flat professional expression of someone who had long since learned to walk into unknown situations without letting any prior conclusion show on his face. He looked at the room, read it quickly. His eyes went to Linda and Lily at the table, then to Reyes, then to Jack. Reyes, a nod. Hendricks. Reyes moved to intercept him before he could cross the room. I need 30 seconds before you proceed. Hendricks looked past him at Jack. Is that the subject? That's a witness, Reyes said. And I need 30 seconds. A pause. Hendricks wasn't the kind of man who liked being slowed down in the middle of a call. But he was also, Jack could see the kind of man who was actually paying attention to what he was walking into. The girl at the table, the woman with the recorder, the heavy-set bartender standing at the door with his arms crossed, the older man at the bar who was watching everything with the quiet alertness of someone who expected to be asked to remember it later. Hendricks was reading the room, and the room had a story. 30 seconds, Hendricks said. Reyes talked fast and low. Jack couldn't hear all of it, but he caught the shape. 2 prior calls to the house, no charges, pattern of behavior, the daughter's account already on record. The timeline of tonight, Travis's call from the parking lot made after police contact. He watched Hendricks' face change. Not dramatically. Not a reversal, but a recalibration. The flat professional expression gained a specific quality, the quality of a man who had started walking in one direction and was now quietly and without external signal adjusting his course. Hendricks looked at Jack. You're Calloway. Yes. You want to tell me what happened tonight in your own words? He can do that at the station, Linda said from the table without looking up from her notepad. Right now, I need another 4 minutes to complete this documentation, and I need this room to stay exactly as it is. Hendricks looked at her. And you are all... Linda Hayes, Child Advocacy County Office. Badge numbers on the card in my left breast pocket if you need it. She still didn't look up. 4 minutes, officer. The documentation I'm completing right now is going to matter more in court than anything else that happens in this room tonight. Please. Another pause. Hendricks looked at Reyes. Reyes nodded very slightly. 4 minutes, Hendricks said. And that was when the front door opened again. Not Hendricks' partner, not another officer, and a woman came through it who was not any of those things. She was somewhere in her mid-30s with wet hair and a coat she hadn't had time to button properly, and the specific expression of someone who had been running on pure adrenaline for the last 40 minutes and had not yet come down. Her eyes swept the room in one fast, desperate arc and landed on the girl at the table. Lily. It came out barely above a breath. Lily's head came up. And something happened in that moment that no amount of documentation or testimony or police procedure could have produced. Something that happened below the level of words in the animal register of a mother and child who had been separated and were now suddenly not. Lily was out of her chair before anyone could move, crossing the room at a dead run, and Sarah Cole caught her daughter and pulled her in and held her with the particular ferocity of a person who has just understood in their body rather than their mind exactly how close they came to something unthinkable. For a moment, nobody spoke. Pete looked at the bar. Carl looked at his drink. Reyes looked at the door. Hendricks looked at nothing in particular. Jack looked at his hands. Mom, Lily said into her mother's shoulder, muffled and thick. I told you, I kept telling you. I know. Sarah's voice broke on the second word, and she didn't try to put it back together. I know, baby. I know. He said I was making it up. I know. She tightened her arms. I know. Do you believe me now? The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Sarah pulled back just enough to look at her daughter's face. Her own face was a wreckage of things: guilt and love, and the specific anguish of a person who had failed to protect someone and knows it and is not going to be able to unfeel that knowledge for the rest of their life. Yes, she said, I believe you. I'm sorry it took me so long. I'm so sorry, Lily. Lily looked at her for a moment with those serious ancient eyes. Then she leaned her forehead against her mother's. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. Linda set down her pen. Reyes cleared his throat. Mrs. Cole, his voice was careful, professional, gentle. I need to ask you some questions, and I need to let you know that your husband is currently in a police vehicle outside. Sarah stiffened. She kept her hands on Lily's shoulders. Did you call your husband after you called dispatch? Reyes asked. No. Fast, certain. I called dispatch. I called my sister. Then I drove here. You drove here directly, say. He texted me when I was already in the car. He said she stopped. Something moved through her face. He said Lily had been taken, that someone had grabbed her off the street. He said I needed to come to this address and tell the police what he told me. She looked at Jack, and something in her expression shifted the specific recalibration of a person who has just understood that the story they were given and the story that is true are two different things. He used me, she said. He was trying to use me to, yes, Linda said simply. He was. Sarah looked at her. Who are you, Wondams? Linda Hayes. I work in child protection, and I need to talk to you tonight if possible. Everything you can tell me, everything you have seen in your home, it matters now in a way it may not have before. The situation has changed. She glanced at Lily, then back at Sarah. Your daughter is very brave and very clear. She gave me 12 minutes of account that would make any attorney take this seriously. But I need you too. Sarah looked down at Lily. Lily looked up at her. Tell her everything, Mom, Lily said. All of it, even the stuff you think doesn't count. Sarah nodded. Slowly then, more definitely. Okay, she said. Okay. Hendricks had moved to the far end of the bar during this exchange and was speaking in low tones to Reyes. Jack watched the conversation without appearing to watch it. He had been good at that for a long time. He could read the body language Reyes was presenting, the case laying out the timeline, the two prior calls, Travis's parking lot phone call. Hendricks was listening with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, asking short questions, receiving short answers. The recalibration Jack had seen begin in his face was continuing, almost complete. Jack walked to the bar and sat down 2 stools from Carl. Pete materialized in front of him with the automatic instinct of a bartender. Coffee. Yeah. The mug came down. Pete poured without being asked and then stood there for a moment, not quite looking at Jack, not quite looking away. That woman who came in, Pete said low. The mom. She really didn't know. She knew something, Jack said. Women in those situations almost always know something. The work he does is convincing them that what they know isn't real. He wrapped his hands around the mug. It's a long project. He didn't build that overnight. Pete was quiet for a moment. She believed him over her own kid. She believed herself over her own instincts first, Jack said. He made sure of that before he ever needed her to believe anything about Lily. That's how it works. He drank the coffee. It was too hot and slightly stale and tasted in this moment like the best thing he'd had in years. She's here now. That's what matters. Is it enough? Jack thought about Travis Cole in the back of Reyes's car, about the attorney he'd called within 30 seconds, about 2 prior calls with no charges, about the very specific, very practiced way Travis had tried to flip the equation tonight, not just deny the accusation, but redirect the entire investigation toward Jack. Use Sarah as an instrument. Make the story about a dangerous man in a dangerous bar instead of a father who had been doing quietly unspeakable things inside a house that looked from the outside completely normal. I don't know yet, he said honestly. Carl, 2 stools down, spoke for the first time in about an hour. His voice was low and rough and carried the particular weight of someone who didn't speak often, but when they did, had considered the words. My granddaughter, he said, not looking at Jack. 12 years ago, similar situation. He paused. The man got 2 years, out in 14 months. He turned his glass. I'm just saying, the system is what it is. I know what the system is, Jack said. Then you know that what happens in the next 48 hours matters more than the next 48 months. Carl finally looked at him. Whatever you can give them, every word, every second of what happened in this room tonight, give it. Don't hold anything back because you're worried about what they dig up about you. Your history is your history. Her history is her life. Jack held his gaze. You got someone coming. Called my nephew. He's an attorney. Good one. Carl turned back to his drink. He'll be here in 20 minutes. Jack didn't say thank you. The situation didn't call for it. He nodded once and turned back to his coffee. Then Hendricks appeared beside him, and the conversation was over. Calloway, the officer pulled out a notepad. I'd like to take your statement now if you're ready. I'm ready. He gave it all. From the moment the door flew open to the moment Lily slid under the table to the first approach. The second approach, the arrival of Danny Reyes' arrival. The shadow at the window, the closed blinds, the pretzels, all of it in sequence with the kind of specific detail that came from a lifetime of training himself to observe and retain. He gave Travis's exact words. He gave the exact position Danny had occupied in the doorway. He described the look in Travis's eyes when the math had changed the cold, flat calculation, the predator's recalibration. He gave Hendricks all of it and held nothing back. Hendricks wrote steadily. He asked two clarifying questions. He didn't push back on anything. When Jack finished, Hendricks clicked his pen closed and looked at him with the expression of a man who had started this call expecting one thing and was leaving with something considerably heavier. "You understand there may be follow-up," he said. "I understand. In the prior arrest record, Travis's attorney is going to bring that up. I know. You still want to give testimony?" "I said I did." Hendricks looked at him for a moment. "Then why?" Jack looked across the room to where Lily sat tucked against her mother's side, one of Sarah's arms around her, talking to Linda, in a voice too low to hear from here. Lily, as if she felt the gaze, glanced over. She held up two fingers in a small, quiet wave. He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned back to Hendricks. "Because the half matters," he said. Hendricks blinked. "What? Nothing? Yes, I'll testify." Hendricks nodded slowly and moved away. Jack turned back to his coffee. From the table, Linda's voice carried over in a brief, distinct fragment. "I need both of your signatures on this. Tonight before you leave. This becomes part of the formal record." A pause. "What you're doing right now, both of you, is the most important thing you've done in a long time. I want you to know that." Then came the moment that none of them had planned for and all of them felt. Lily stood up from her chair and walked across the room to Jack. She stopped in front of him. She reached up and tugged the sleeve of his jacket once lightly. He looked down. She held up the small, worn pretzel bowl that Pete had set on her table earlier. It was empty now. She looked at it, then looked at him, and her expression was entirely serious. "Can I have more pretzels?" Pete, who had caught the exchange, reached under the bar without a word and produced a full bag. He set it on the counter in front of her. She took the bag. She looked at Jack with that unreadable 7-year-old directness. Then she said, "I'm going to remember this forever, what you did tonight." He looked at her. He wanted to say something that was worthy of the gravity of the moment, something that honored the specific terrible courage it had taken to run 6 blocks in the rain and crawl under a stranger's table and trust that the biggest, most dangerous-looking person in the room was the safe one. Something that recognized what she had survived before tonight and what she was going to have to survive still, because this night was an ending of one thing and a beginning of another, and the beginning was not going to be easy. But she was 7 years old, and she was holding a bag of pretzels, and she had looked at him with those eyes. So he said, "I'll remember it too." She nodded satisfied and walked back to her mother. Jack picked up his coffee. Outside, the sound of Travis Cole's attorney's car pulling up was still 10 minutes away. The documentation on the table in Linda's handwriting was already 6 pages long. Sarah was still talking, slowly at first, then faster, the words loosening as she spoke the account of months and years beginning to take shape on the page as something real and specific and provable. The kind of thing that couldn't be countered by a man in a parking lot with a borrowed narrative and a smooth voice. The storm outside had shifted, still raining, but the violent driving quality of it had softened into something steadier, less frantic. The kind of rain that settles in for the long night and doesn't rush. Carl's nephew arrived at 22 minutes, which was 2 minutes over his estimated time, and the look on his face when Carl explained the situation was the look of a man who had just been handed exactly the kind of case he had gone to law school for. He sat down at the table beside Linda without being asked, and they began to talk in low, rapid, precise sentences, two professionals who had worked the same territory from different angles and knew immediately that they were speaking the same language. Jack watched this from the bar and felt something he didn't have a precise name for. Not satisfaction, exactly. Something older and quieter. The feeling of a thing that had been broken for a long time beginning very slowly to move toward repair. Not fixed, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but moving. He put down his mug. He thought about what Carl had said, 48 hours, give them everything, don't hold back. He thought about the attorney who was 10 minutes away and the counter-narrative Travis was going to construct and the 2 prior calls that had gone nowhere and the particular grinding machinery of a system that was capable of both enormous failure and occasionally, if you pushed hard enough, and documented everything and showed up and refused to leave something that looked enough like justice to matter. He thought about a 7-year-old girl who had run toward a light without a plan. And then he pulled out his cracked, tape-repaired phone and started writing his statement in his own words, every detail from the beginning. Because if he was going to do this, he was going to do it right. And doing it right meant leaving nothing out and trusting nothing to memory and giving everyone in that courtroom, whenever the day came, every single thing they needed to make the decision that a child's life depended on. He wrote for a long time. The rain came down. Lily fell asleep against her mother's shoulder at some point. After 11, the pretzel bag still loosely held in one hand, her breathing deep and slow for the first time and longer than anyone in that room could know. Sarah kept her arm around her and didn't move, and the expression on her face was the expression of a woman who had made a decision. Not a complicated decision, not a negotiated one, but the clear, absolute kind that strips everything else away and leaves only the thing that matters. She was not going back. She was not going to explain it or justify it or wait for the right moment. She was done. Linda looked at her across the table and saw it and nodded once. Carl's nephew kept writing. Outside, a car pulled up, the attorney's car, the beginning of the other side of the story. Jack finished his statement, folded it, and set it face down on the bar. He was ready. Travis Cole's attorney was a man named Gerald Fitch, and Gerald Fitch had the kind of face that had been trained over 20 years of practice to express nothing that wasn't calculated. He came through the door of the Iron Lantern at 11:17 with a briefcase and the particular brand of controlled urgency that expensive attorneys deployed when a client had done something bad enough to require an after-midnight house call. He looked at the room at Linda and Carl's nephew at the table at Reyes and Hendricks, near the door at Jack at the bar, and he did the same kind of rapid arithmetic that Travis had been doing all night, except Fitch was better at it. He was paid to be better at it. He went directly to Hendricks. "My client is being detained without cause," he said before Hendricks could speak. "I'd like to understand the basis for that." "Your client is being questioned," Hendricks said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Not a question. Fitch looked across the room at Jack. "I understand there's an individual here with a prior arrest record who was in physical proximity to a minor child without parental consent. I'd like to know why that individual isn't currently the subject of this conversation." The room tightened. Carl's nephew looked up from the table. Linda set down her pen. Jack didn't move. "The individual you're referring to," Linda said from the table in a voice that was entirely level and entirely without warmth, "is the reason that child is alive and safe tonight, and I have 6 pages of documentation that establishes that in considerable detail. Would you like to review it before you continue, or would you prefer to keep talking?" Fitch looked at her. Something moved in his calculation. He was good, but Linda Hayes had been in rooms with attorneys like Gerald Fitch for 15 years, and she had the specific advantage of a person who cared about exactly one thing and therefore couldn't be leveraged. "Who are you?" he said. She told him. Title, office, badge number, the same as she'd given Hendricks. Then she said, "Your client made 2 phone calls tonight from the parking lot of this establishment. The first was to a man named Danny, who arrived here with apparent intent to physically remove a child by force and is currently being interviewed by Officer Morrison outside. The second call was to the dispatch line, in which your client made a false report characterizing the events inside this building in terms that were directly contradicted by 2 police officers, a bartender, 4 other witnesses, a child advocacy specialist, and the recorded testimony of a 7-year-old girl." She picked up her pen. "So when you walk in here and suggest that the man who protected that child is the subject of concern, I want you to understand exactly what you're walking into." Fitch was quiet for 3 seconds. 5. He adjusted his grip on his briefcase. "I'll need to review the documentation," he said. "I expected you would," Linda said. "Sit down." He sat down. Jack turned back to his coffee. Reyes appeared at his elbow, low and quick. "Danny's talking," he said. "Opened up the moment Morrison got him alone. Apparently he and Travis have a history that goes back further than tonight. Morrison's getting it on record." "What kind of history?" Reyes's jaw was tight. "The kind that adds charges." Jack absorbed this without visible reaction, but something shifted inside him. A slow, careful loosening, the cautious relaxation of a person who has been braced for the worst for so long, that good news arrives with the strange, almost suspicious quality of something too convenient to be real. "Danny rolls on Travis," he said. "Danny rolls on Travis," Reyes confirmed. His attorney showed up faster than Fitch did and apparently gave him a very clear picture of what cooperation looked like compared to solidarity. He paused. Travis is not going home tonight. What about Sarah and Lily? Linda's working on emergency placement. Temporary protective order is being drafted. He looked at the table where Sarah sat with Lily still sleeping against her shoulder. She's not going back to that house. Neither of them is. Jack nodded, set down his mug. Then it's moving. It's moving. Reyes hesitated. I want to say something. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. A beat. What you did tonight, the way you handled it, you kept it from going sideways 3 different times. The way you stood when Travis walked back in. The way you didn't engage when Danny came through the door. The way you were still standing there when I got through that window. He looked at Jack directly. I've been doing this 8 years. I've seen people freeze. I've seen people escalate. I've seen people do a lot of things. He paused. I haven't seen many people do exactly what needed to be done and nothing else. Well, Jack was quiet for a moment. I had a good reason to be careful, he said. The girl. The girl. He looked at Lily's sleeping face across the room. She trusted me the moment she walked in. She didn't think about it. She didn't evaluate it. She just ran to me and trusted me. You don't get handed something like that and waste it. Reyes looked at her too. Then he nodded once and moved away back to the business of the night, which was still ongoing and would be for some time. Jack stayed at the bar. Fitch reviewed Linda's documentation for 11 minutes without speaking. His face was professional, controlled, expressionless. But Carl's nephew, who had positioned himself at the opposite end of the table and was watching Fitch, the way a man watches a card player he suspects of cheating, caught something. He leaned forward. You've seen her work before, he said to Fitch. Not accusing, observing. Fitch looked up. A pause. Once, he said, different county. How did that one go? Another pause. Fitch looked back at the documentation. My client took a plea, he said quietly. Carl's nephew leaned back, said nothing. Linda kept writing. It was almost midnight when Sarah finally spoke directly to Jack for the first time. She had been aware of him all evening. She would have had to be blind not to be the way the room organized itself around him. But they hadn't spoken, hadn't been introduced in any formal sense, had existed in the same space, in the way that people exist in emergency situations, parallel and purposeful and aware of each other, without the ordinary social architecture of conversation. She crossed the room while Lily slept still in her chair and stood in front of the bar. She looked at Jack. He looked back at her. You moved your chair, she said. He understood immediately what she meant. She needed a place, he said. She ran here. Sarah's voice had the particular rough quality of someone who had been crying recently and had stopped and was holding the remainder of it carefully. Out of everywhere she could have gone, she ran here. Kids do that sometimes. They find the place they need. She found it. She found you. He didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer that didn't sound like something it wasn't. Sarah looked at her hands. I knew, she said, not everything, but I knew more than I let myself believe. She stopped. Started again. He's very good at making you doubt yourself, at making you feel like the thing you're seeing isn't the thing that's actually there. I've been so confused for so long that I stopped trusting my own eyes. She looked up, but she never stopped. She kept telling me. She never gave up on making me see it. She's not going to stop until the thing is fixed, Jack said. That's who she is. I know. Something in Sarah's face broke open for just a moment, raw and unguarded and enormous, and then she pulled it back. I'm going to spend a very long time making that up to her. She doesn't think of it that way, Jack said. She's not keeping score. Sarah looked at him, slightly surprised. She's practical, Jack said. She told me herself she figures out what's true and she moves forward. You being here, believing her, telling Linda what you know, that's not paying a debt. That's just the next thing. That's how she thinks. He paused. She's something your kid. For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. She pressed her lips together and nodded once tightly and walked back to her daughter. Jack watched her go. Then Carl appeared at his elbow quietly the way Carl did everything. He set his old flip phone face down on the bar. My nephew says the documentation is solid, he said. And Danny's testimony, if it holds, closes two gaps that the prior cases couldn't close. He paused. He thinks it goes to trial. How long? Months, maybe. Could be longer. These things take time. I know. You ready for that kind of time? Jack thought about what that meant, practically the follow-up interviews, the attorney's attempts to deconstruct his credibility, the process of having every year of his history held up in a courtroom under fluorescent light and examined for anything that could be used to make a jury look at him sideways instead of at Travis. He had known this was part of it from the moment he told Reyes yes. He hadn't reconsidered once. Yeah, he said. I'm ready. Carl picked up his phone. Good, he said. He went back to his stool. The room began very slowly to change its quality. Not to relax, exactly too much had happened for the night to fully release its tension, but to settle. The acute, held-breath urgency of the hours before midnight gave way to something more deliberate. People moved with less adrenaline and more intention. Linda finished her documentation and began the process of copies and signatures. Reyes took 3 separate statements from Pete and Carl and one of the other regulars who had been at the far end of the bar all evening and had it turned out a very clear memory for faces and words and the exact sequence of events. Hendricks spoke to Fitch in the corner for a long time with the tone of 2 people working out the arithmetic of a situation where the numbers had already been decided and what remained was only the process of writing them down. Travis Cole, at some point after midnight, was placed under formal arrest. Jack didn't hear the announcement. He heard it in the change of Reyes' posture when he came back inside the specific, minute release of tension in the shoulders of a man who has been carrying a difficult thing and has just set it down. He heard it in the way Fitch closed his briefcase without speaking. He heard it in Linda letting out one long, slow breath and then picking up her phone to make a call she'd been waiting to make. He heard it in Lily's voice. She had woken up not from any commotion, but in the way children sometimes wake from deep sleep suddenly and completely like a switch. She sat up in her chair, looked around the room with clear, present eyes, oriented herself in approximately 2 seconds, and looked at her mother. Sarah took her daughter's hand. Lily looked at Linda. Is it done? The first part, Linda said. There's more ahead, but the first part is done. Lily nodded slowly, absorbed this with that characteristic thoroughness. Is he going to go to jail? He's been arrested tonight. What happens after that is a process. It takes time. But what you did tonight, what you told me, that's going to be part of that process every step of the way. Will I have to talk about it again in court? Possibly. We have ways to make that less difficult than it sounds. I'll be with you. Your mom will be with you. Linda paused. And there are people, including some people in this room, who are going to stand up and say what they saw. You won't be doing it alone. Lily looked at Jack. He was already looking at her. Is that true? She said. Yes, he said. She held his gaze for a moment with those dark, serious eyes that had already seen too much and survived it. Then she did something he hadn't seen her do once in the entire night. She smiled. Small, real, and brief, the kind of smile that doesn't perform anything, that just is, and it landed somewhere in Jack's chest with the quiet, undramatic force of something important becoming permanently true. Okay, she said. Good. It was close to 1 a.m. when Linda finally signaled that they were ready to leave. A temporary placement had been arranged. Sarah's sister, who lived 40 minutes away and had been called 3 hours ago, and had said yes before the sentence was finished. Reyes had arranged an escort. There was paperwork, there was always paperwork, but the kind that meant safety rather than bureaucracy, the kind that put physical distance between a child and the man who had hurt her. Sarah stood and lifted the pretzel bag from Lily's lap and handed it to Pete. Keep it, Pete said immediately. Lily accepted it back with the gravity of someone receiving something meaningful. She folded the top of the bag down neatly and held it against her chest. She crossed the room to Jack one more time. She stood in front of him. She looked up. He looked down. The bar was still and quiet around them, and everyone in it was doing the specific thing that people do when a moment is important and they know it, giving it room. I'm going to come back, she said. When everything is finished, I'm going to come back and sit at your table. I know, he said. You'll be here. I'll be here. She held out her hand, small, thin, still slightly cold. He looked at it for a moment, then reached down and took it, careful, complete, and shook it once formally, the way two people shake hands when they have made a deal that matters. Deal, she said. Deal, deal, he said. She let go. She walked back to her mother. Sarah looked at Jack over her daughter's head and pressed her lips together and nodded. Not a social nod, not a polite one, but the deep, specific nod of a person who has no adequate words and knows it and is using the only thing they have left. He nodded back. They walked out the door. The room was very quiet after that. Pete poured a fresh cup of coffee without being asked. Carl put his old flip phone back in his pocket. Linda walked past Jack on her way out and paused just long enough to say low and direct, "You did good tonight, Jack." She didn't wait for a response. She had never been the kind of person who waited for responses to things that didn't require them. Reyes was the last officer to leave. He paused at the door. "I'll be in touch about the statement." "I know where to find you," Jack said. And then the door closed, and the Iron Lantern held only its regulars and its noise and its light, the same as it had held them every other night, except that something had changed in the walls of the place, some quality of the air, some permanent residue of what had happened in it that would not quite go away. Jack sat at his table in the back corner, the one with the chair against the wall. He sat with his hands around his coffee mug, and he looked at the space under the table, the narrow, specific space between the chair leg and the wall, the space where a 7-year-old girl had pressed her knees to her chest and eaten pretzels, and asked him questions and told him the plainest, hardest truth of her life. And he held what he felt in the way he had always held difficult feelings, which was steady and without drama, and without letting them run anywhere they didn't need to go. He thought about Linda's documentation. 6 pages that would become part of a record that Travis Cole's attorney could not erase and could not redirect and could not fold into a counter-narrative at on because it had been made in the right room at the right time by the right person, and because a girl of 7 had spoken it clearly and without decoration, and because everyone who had been in this room tonight had decided in their own way and without being asked to be a witness. He thought about Carl's grandson and his 12 years of the aftermath of the same kind of failure. He thought about the 2 prior calls that had gone nowhere. He thought about all the lily-shaped silences in all the rooms in all the towns where nobody moved their chair. He thought about moving his chair. He picked up his coffee and drank it. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, when the sun had finally returned after a long, wet stretch of early spring rain, the door of the Iron Lantern opened and Lily walked in. She was wearing both sneakers, matching ones this time, white with a small star on each heel, and a blue jacket that was new and fit her properly. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes were clear. She walked across the room without running, without looking over her shoulder, without the particular quality of compressed terror that had moved through every cell of her body the last time she came through that door. She walked like a person who was going somewhere she chose to go. She sat down across from Jack. He moved his coffees to the side and folded his hands on the table. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. "The trial date got set," she said. "Linda called this morning. How do you feel about that?" She thought about it, really thought about it the way she thought about everything seriously, thoroughly, without pretending toward an answer that was cleaner than the truth. "Scared," she said, "but also not scared, both at the same time." "That's about right," he said. "Linda says that's normal." "Linda's right." She looked at the table, looked up. "My mom's in the car. She didn't want to come in. She said to tell you, thank you." "You can tell her she already did." Lily nodded, then she reached into the pocket of her new blue jacket and produced slightly crushed but intact the folded-down pretzel bag from 3 weeks ago. She set it on the table between them. He looked at it, looked at her. "I saved some," she said with complete seriousness, "for when I came back." Jack Calloway, who had not smiled, truly smiled without covering it in longer than he could accurately remember smiled. It started somewhere behind the sternum, the same place she had been landing small, precise blows all evening 3 weeks ago, and it moved up through his chest and reached his face and stayed there quiet and real and completely unguarded. He reached across the table and took a pretzel. "The half matters," he said. She grinned wide and sudden and entirely 7 years old and took one too. Outside, the sun was still on. The street was dry. Sarah was in the car with the window cracked, watching the door of the Iron Lantern, and breathing slowly, practicing the particular daily discipline of a woman who had decided to be done with fear, and was learning one careful day at a time exactly what that meant. And inside, in the back corner, a little girl and a man who moved his chair sat together at a table in the light. And that was exactly enough. And it was real, and it was theirs.